Wyoming Territory, February 1879. Harlan Tate pushed open the back door of his barn, snow crunching under his boots, and stopped cold when he saw the girl curled up in the corner. She looked half frozen, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, her arms clutching a bundled baby tight against her chest. She blinked up at him, pale and wide-eyed. "We just needed somewhere warm." He did not move. The wind howled behind him, sweeping flakes into the shadows of the shed. The girl flinched from it, pulling the baby closer. Harlan saw her lips were blue. He stepped in, shut the door, and said quietly, "That child breathing?" She nodded fast. "Yes, she is cold, but she is breathing." Harlan crossed the dirt floor in 4 strides and knelt beside her. The baby was maybe 3 months old, red-faced and quiet, wrapped in a fraying quilt. He touched the edge of it gently, then looked at the girl. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her hands trembled. He tugged off his coat and laid it over her shoulders without asking. "Come on, you both need heat and food. Can you walk?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He helped her up. She was light, like she had not eaten properly in days. He led her through the snow to the house, his hand steady under her arm. Inside, he stoked the fire high, then brought blankets from his room and wrapped them around her and the baby on the settee. She sank into them with a long breath, like her bones were finally releasing something tight. He crouched in front of her. "What is your name?" "Geneva," she said, voice soft but steady. "Geneva Briggs, and this is Vera." Harlan nodded once. "Harlan Tate, this is my place. You are safe here." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was trying to decide if he meant it. Her eyes were dark and tired, but they held something sharp underneath. She had not come this far to beg. She had come to survive. Harlan stood. "I will get you both something warm to eat." He moved through the kitchen, stirring stew from the pot he had left simmering that morning, slicing bread. When he brought it to her, she sat straighter, thanking him quietly before eating like she had not in days. The baby stirred and Geneva rocked her gently, a tired rhythm that spoke of long nights and no help. When they were finished, she said, "I am sorry for sneaking into your barn. I did not know where else to go." "Where did you come from?" Harlan asked, sitting in the chair across from her. Her eyes flicked to the fire. "Nebraska. I left 6 days ago. I was trying to get to my aunt in Rock Springs." Her voice caught, but she pushed on. "I ran out of money in Rawlins. Then the storm hit." Harlan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You walked from Rawlins?" "Most of it. A man with a wagon brought me partway, but he turned off east. We walked the rest." She glanced at the baby, then looked down at her hands. "I thought maybe we would not make it." Harlan's jaw tightened. He had seen weather like this take grown men down. And she could not have been more than 20. "Why did you leave?" he asked gently. Geneva looked up, and for a beat she was silent. Then she said, "My husband died in October. He was a farmhand. After that, his brother said we were a burden. He took the land and left us with nothing." Vera was still nursing. I waited as long as I could. Harlan felt something settle in his chest, low and hot, like coal catching flame. He had seen women pushed out, used up, forgotten. But she had walked through ice and wind carrying a child, alone. "You are not a burden here," he said. "You can stay, for as long as you need." Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast and nodded. "Thank you." That night, he made up the bed in the small room off the kitchen. Geneva lay down without protest, Vera tucked in beside her. Harlan stood for a moment in the doorway, watching them. The baby's small fingers rested against Geneva's collarbone. Geneva's breath was steady now, her lashes brushing her cheek. He closed the door quietly and went to tend the fire. The next morning, the storm had eased. The sky was iron gray, but the wind had died. Harlan found Geneva in the kitchen, hair braided back, nursing Vera with a quiet focus. She looked up when he walked in. "Is it all right if I sweep?" she asked. You do not have to do anything, he said. I want to. He handed her the broom without a word. She swept while he chopped wood, and they ate together at noon. He noticed how she touched the baby often, like she was making sure she was still real and warm and alive. She asked nothing for herself. That evening he brought in extra firewood and found her standing by the window, holding Vera, watching the snow fall. Your girl is healthy, he said. Strong lungs. Geneva smiled, a small, real one. She gets that from me. He laughed and she turned toward him, the baby nestled against her shoulder. You do not talk much, she said. I never saw the use in saying things that did not matter. She nodded. I like that. They stood there in the quiet, the fire crackling behind them. Geneva shifted Vera in her arms and looked up at him. Why do you live out here all alone, Harlan? He paused. I tried town for a while, lost both my parents to fever in '74. After that, I did not want to be near people for a while. She nodded like she understood that exactly. He added, I was not expecting anyone to come through that door. Her eyes softened. I was not expecting to find someone kind behind it. That night, she asked if she could help with supper. He handed her the knife and watched her slice potatoes into the stew. Her hands were steady now. She moved like someone who had known hard work, not been broken by it. After Vera was asleep, Geneva sat by the fire, her feet tucked under her, and Harlan watched her from his chair. She caught him looking and smiled. What? She asked. Nothing. She tilted her head. You look at me strange sometimes. I do not mean to. I do not mind. She was quiet for a moment, then said, It has been a long time since someone looked at me like I mattered. Harlan swallowed. You do. Geneva stared at him, and something passed between them, something slow and real and quiet. She looked down, brushing a hand over the edge of the blanket. Thank you, she said. He stood slowly. Good night, Geneva. Her voice was soft. Good night, Harlan. As he walked to his room, he paused at the door and looked back. She was still sitting there, firelight on her face, her head bowed. She looked peaceful, safe, and for the first time in a long while, so did he. The wind had gone still by morning, leaving behind a crust of frost over the pasture and a sky the color of old tin. Harlan stepped outside with the bucket swinging from his hand and the scent of coffee in his beard. The cattle were quiet, huddled near the fence line, their breath rising in soft clouds. He worked without hurry, his thoughts pulled back to the house more often than not. When he returned, Geneva was at the table mending a tear in her only shawl. She didn't look up, but her fingers paused at the sound of the door. I boiled water for washing, she said. There's some left warming by the stove. Harlan set his gloves down and nodded. That was thoughtful. She didn't answer, just kept stitching, her head bent low. Vera was asleep again, curled in a basket lined with wool Harlan had brought down from the attic. Geneva had padded the bottom with one of his older shirts, folded over twice. Harlan poured himself a second mug and stood across from her, watching her thread the needle with care. You always sew that neat, she glanced up, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. If I didn't, my mother would have had my hands for kindling. What was her name? Ruth, she said, pulling the thread through. She made dresses for the town women. Never could understand why I preferred mending boots and trousers instead. Sounds like she raised someone useful. Geneva gave a small, thoughtful nod, then tied off the stitch. She died 3 winters back. Fever took her fast. Harlan sat down. He didn't ask more. The room settled into a quiet that wasn't heavy, just full. Later that day, Geneva stepped out onto the porch while Harlan was oiling the harness. She was wrapped in his coat again, the sleeves still too long, Vera bundled against her chest. She likes the cold air, she said, rocking slightly. Not too long, just enough to wake her. Harlan nodded, checking the leather for wear. You ever handle horses? Some. My husband didn't like me near them, said I was too small, but I learned when he wasn't looking. He glanced over. You want to help brush them down after supper? She smiled, slow and certain. I'd like that. That night, in the lantern-lit stillness of the barn, Geneva stood beside him with a curry comb in hand. She moved with quiet confidence, talking to the mare in low tones. Harlan watched her loosen the tangles from the mane, her breath misting in the barn light. She's gentle, Geneva said. She likes people who don't rush her. Geneva met his eyes, something unspoken passing between them before she looked away again. Back at the house, she set Vera down for the night, humming low while she tucked the blanket around her. Harlan had never heard the tune before. It sounded like something passed down, not written. When she came back into the main room, he was carving a block of pine by the hearth, the shavings gathered in a small pile at his feet. What are you making? He held it out. Not quite finished, but the shape of a small horse was clear. For Vera, he said. I figured she ought to have something of her own. Geneva took it with both hands, her thumb brushing the curve of its back. No one's ever made her anything before. She's got someone now. Geneva didn't speak. She sat beside him, the horse in her lap, the firelight catching the edge of her profile. After a long while she said, You don't ask much about what came before. I figured you'd tell me what mattered. She looked at him then, eyes steady. There was a man in Rawlins. Told me he'd take me as far as Green River. Said he wanted to help, but he didn't. Harlan didn't move. I got away before he could do worse, she said, but I lost the last of my money running. That's how I ended up walking. He reached over, not touching her, just letting his hand rest on the armrest near hers. You don't owe me your past. I know, she said. But I don't want to hide it. You don't have to. She nodded once, and the silence that followed was fuller somehow, not empty but understood. The next day, Geneva rose early and made cornmeal griddle cakes without asking. She balanced Vera on her hip while she cooked, one-handed and efficient. Harlan sat at the table, watching her move in the morning light. You ever think about staying in one place? He asked. She didn't answer right away. I used to before everything changed. It wouldn't be charity, he said. If you were here. Geneva's back stayed to him as she flipped the last cake. You really mean that? I do. She turned then, Vera wide-eyed on her hip, and looked at him like she was measuring something deeper than words. I think I'd like to stay, she said softly. Harlan nodded, slow and sure. Then we'll figure the rest out together. March settled in with a slow thaw. The snow softened along the fence posts, revealing patches of dull brown grass beneath. Harlan repaired what the frost had split: gate latches, the east shed's roofline, the trough boards along the pasture. Geneva worked beside him when she could, carrying Vera in a sling she fashioned from an old grain sack and a strip of muslin Harlan found in a trunk. One afternoon she stood in the root cellar, sorting through the remaining potatoes. He stepped down behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. You think you'll plant come spring? She asked, not turning. Harlan leaned a shoulder against the dirt wall. I usually put in beans and carrots. Some squash. She brushed dirt from a russet. I know how to set a row straight. My father was stubborn about that. You were close with him, not always, but I understood him. She paused. He didn't talk much either. Harlan watched her for a moment. You miss him, some days more than others. She looked over her shoulder. He died before Vera came. He would have liked her. They came up the steps slowly, arms full. Geneva stopped just outside the cellar door, her eyes on the sky. You think it'll stay warm? She asked. Hard to say. Wyoming likes to lie about spring. She looked out past the pasture where the land ran wide and gold under the low sun. I never saw a sky like this before coming west. It doesn't stop. No, it doesn't. She shifted Vera on her hip. It makes you feel small. Harlan nodded. But not unimportant. That night, after Vera was asleep, Geneva sat on the porch with a shawl around her shoulders. The lantern inside the house cast a soft glow through the window. Harlan joined her, handing over a tin cup of warm cider. She accepted it with both hands. "You always this decent to strangers." "I try not to be," he said. She smiled but didn't laugh. "What changed?" He hesitated, then sat down beside her. "You didn't ask for anything, just tried to keep your child alive. That's not something you ignore." Geneva sipped slowly. "I thought I might die out there, not from cold, just from being invisible." "You're not invisible." She looked at him then, really looked. "You always this sure of things." "No, but I'm sure about this." Geneva set the cup down, her fingers brushing his sleeve as she did. "I don't know what I am to you," she said, "but I know what you've been to me." Harlan didn't move. "Say it plain." She folded her hands in her lap. "You gave me the first kindness that didn't come with a price. I don't know how to carry that yet." "You don't have to carry it," he said. "You just live in it." They sat in the quiet a while, the air cool but not biting. She didn't reach for his hand, but she didn't pull away when his arm rested close beside hers. In the days that followed, Geneva began stitching a new quilt from scraps Harlan had kept in an old chest. She laid each square with care, letting Vera play beside her on the woven rug by the hearth. Harlan came in from the barn one evening, dust in his hair, and paused when he saw the pattern taking shape. "You planning to keep that?" he asked. "I was thinking we might use it in the second room," she said, smoothing a corner. "If that's still mine." He crouched beside her, eyes on the fabric. "It's yours. This whole place is if you want it." Geneva didn't answer right away. Then she reached down, picked Vera up, and stood. "I do want it," she said, "but not like some guest waiting to be sent on." "You're not," he said. "Not anymore." She looked up at him. "Then I'd like to make this a home," he nodded. "Together." That night she came to him after the fire had burned low. She didn't say anything, just stepped into the room, Vera asleep in her arms, and looked at him like a decision had settled in her bones. Harlan moved aside and lifted the blankets. She laid the child between them, then let herself rest against his chest. Neither said a word. Outside, the wind had calmed. The moon cast a silver line across the windowpane, and the house, for the first time in years, felt full. The ground softened under the warming sun, and with it came the first tentative green along the creek. Harlan brought out the iron plow from the lean-to, its blade dulled from 2 seasons of disuse. He spent a full morning sharpening it, the rasp of metal on stone echoing up toward the hills. Geneva watched from the porch with Vera bundled on her lap, her eyes following the sweep of his arm without saying a word. By late afternoon, she stepped down barefoot into the patch of soil behind the barn, her hem gathered in one hand. "There's wild onion out near the fence," she said, shading her eyes. "I saw the tops pushing through." "You want to set roots here," Harlan said quietly. "You'll need more than just onion." She considered him a moment before answering. "I was thinking tomatoes. Maybe beans if the frost holds off." He nodded and reached for the hoe leaning against the wall. "Then we'd better mark out the rows." She worked beside him in the quiet, her steps deliberate, her hands pressing into the dirt like she'd known this rhythm her whole life. Vera lay swaddled beneath a shade cloth they rigged between fence posts, sleeping through the steady scrape of tools and low murmur of wind. As the days stretched, so did the light. Geneva began rising before dawn, not out of need but instinct. She'd come into the kitchen with her sleeves already rolled, eyes still soft from sleep, and pour water for coffee while Harlan laced his boots. They didn't speak much in the mornings, but there was comfort in the hush, in the quiet presence of another body moving nearby. One evening just after supper, she stepped out with a basket and said, There's a woman in town who sells thread and tin buttons. She comes through every fortnight. You want to go into town? Harlan asked. She hesitated. I was thinking I could sell some stitching if I made enough. I've mended about every piece of cloth in this house already. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and leaned back against the counter. You worried about folks asking questions. They always do, she said. But I've got answers now. The next morning, they hitched the wagon and rode the 4 miles into Medicine Bow, Vera snug in a sling against Geneva's chest. Harlan kept one hand steady on the reins, the other resting near his rifle, though the trail was quiet and the sky wide with promise. In town, Geneva walked with her head up. Harlan watched her speak with the merchant woman, her voice calm, her shoulders square. She traded a bundle of hand-sewn napkins for sewing needles and a bolt of muslin, then bought a single lemon with what was left. She held it out to Harlan as they climbed back into the wagon. Haven't tasted one in years. He took it in his palm. We'll save it for Sunday. That night, she boiled a small pot of sugar water and sliced the lemon thin, laying the pieces out for drying. The kitchen filled with a sharp, clean scent that neither of them spoke about, though they both paused now and then just to breathe it in. Later, as the light faded, Geneva sat by the window with her sewing in her lap. Harlan leaned at the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her fingers move. You ever think about marrying again? He asked. She didn't look up. I used to think I'd never want to, but I don't feel like I used to. He waited, the stillness between them stretching long. She set her stitching aside and met his gaze. With you, I don't feel like I'm waiting on something awful to happen. He stepped closer slowly and knelt beside her chair. I've got no fancy words, but I know what I've seen. You belong here. And I want you to stay. Geneva reached out and touched his jaw, her thumb tracing the line of stubble there. Then ask me plain, he swallowed. Would you be my wife, Geneva? She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. Yes. I'll be yours. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, steady and silent. Inside, the house held the warmth of something beginning. The wedding took place beneath a cottonwood tree just east of the pasture, where the ground had dried enough to hold a small gathering. The preacher rode in from town, dust on his coat and scripture folded in his pocket. Harlan wore his cleanest shirt, collar starched and sleeves rolled to the wrist. Geneva stood across from him in a pale calico dress she'd sewn from the muslin she'd traded for, her hands steady as she held Vera close against her hip. They said their vows with the breeze threading through the branches above, and Vera, quiet and wide-eyed, reached for Harlan's collar as the preacher finished the blessing. Geneva smiled then, one she hadn't worn since before her world changed, and Harlan touched the back of her hand, careful and firm. Afterward, they shared cornbread and dried apple slices with the preacher beneath the tree, and when he rode off again, they stood watching the dust trail fade into the ridgeline. Neither spoke. There was no need. They turned back toward the house together, Geneva's arm tucked into his, their steps matching without effort. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their days shifted gently into place. Geneva took to the west field, clearing brush and marking out where the squash rows would go. She carried Vera on her back, wrapped tight in a sling she stitched from the hem of her wedding dress, cut short to work easier in the dirt. Harlan built a second coop for layers, muttering about fox tracks near the fence, and Geneva rubbed linseed oil into the old hinges on the back door without being asked. One evening, Harlan came in late from the shed and found Geneva bending over a ledger book on the table, candlelight warming her features. Vera slept in the cradle Harlan had carved from pine scraps, her breath even, her hand curled around a scrap of muslin. "You keeping the books now?" he asked, wiping his hands on a cloth. I thought I'd track the seed costs and what we might earn come harvest, she said. If the hens lay like they should, we could trade eggs for coffee and lamp oil without dipping into the feed money. Harlan pulled a chair beside her. You think ahead. I have to, she said, not looking up. Can't afford to live just one day at a time anymore. He studied her face, the lines that had softened since winter, the steadiness she wore like a second skin. You ever think about what comes after this place? He asked. She lifted her eyes. No, I think about what we can build here. What Vera might grow up knowing. Harlan reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. That's enough for me. As spring deepened, Geneva stitched curtains from flour sacks and planted marigolds along the porch edge. Vera began to crawl, dragging herself across the plank floor with determination that made Geneva laugh from the belly low and warm. Harlan fixed the broken hinge on the barn door and added a second shelf above the hearth, where Geneva placed a small tin box of herbs. She began drying peppermint and yarrow, preparing for the summer illnesses that might come. One dusky afternoon, Geneva found Harlan in the field, leaning against the fence with his hat low and the sky turning amber behind him. She started saying "Pa," she said, brushing dust from her apron. He turned slowly. She mean me. She looks at you when she says it, Geneva said, stepping closer. That counts for something. Harlan reached out and touched her waist, pulling her in. You sure you're content here? He asked. She nodded, letting her forehead rest against his shoulder. I'm not just content, Harlan. I'm whole. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that settled deep and stayed. The wind stirred the grass around them, and somewhere nearby a meadowlark called once and fell quiet. That night, they sat on the porch while Vera slept inside. Geneva leaned into him, her fingers laced through his. You think she'll remember this? She asked. She'll remember safety, Harlan said. She'll remember love. They stayed like that until the stars thickened overhead, the night quiet and full, years passed slow and kind. The garden grew wide and unruly, full of beans, squash, and tomatoes that Geneva canned in the heat of late summer. Vera learned to walk between the rows, her hands stained with dirt, her laughter sharp as wind chimes. Harlan taught her to hold a hammer and how to listen for horse hooves before you saw the dust. Geneva taught her how to stitch and how to speak with fairness. Even when angry, they never left the land. They didn't need to. In time, the town came to know Geneva as the woman who made tinctures that worked better than anything out of Cheyenne. Harlan became the man folks sent for when a fence post wouldn't hold or a horse balked at the plow. Vera grew into a girl with her mother's quiet eyes and her father's steadiness, and she never went a day without knowing she was loved. One late summer day, Harlan stood by the fence, watching Geneva in the far field, her skirt brushing the tops of the dry grass. She turned then, as if sensing him, and lifted a hand, just a small wave, but enough. He raised his hand in return. There was nothing to say. Everything they needed had already been given. Everything that mattered was already here. They lived like that, steady, rooted, and full of quiet joy for the rest of their days.